So, time then for the press preview from COP26 here in Glasgow. It's our first look at what is on the front pages of tomorrow morning's papers. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Paul McNamee, the editor of the Big Issue, and Rachel Watson, the deputy political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. They'll both be with us from now until just before midnight. A very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Let's see what's on some of those front pages for you then. We're going to start with the Metro. Pledge to save Earth's lungs, reads their front page, as COP26 world leaders commit to reversing deforestation and slashing methane emissions. Well, the Times also talks COP26 with the headline, PM hails deal to cut methane emissions. Here's the front of the FT, confronting corporate climate commitments. Their headline, banks under fire for diluting green pledges since Paris climate action. And The Guardian says the heat waves and wildfires of this summer would not have happened without global warming. In other news, the front of the Telegraph looks at the Prime Minister's plans to replace the House of Commons standards watchdog. Richard Madeley is announced as Piers Morgan's replacement on Good Morning Britain in The Sun, with the headline, Richard and Susie. And I'm joined tonight by Paul McNamee, the editor of The Big Issue, and also Rachel Watson, the deputy political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. Great to see you both. So let's get cracking, shall we? A very big day here in Glasgow. A number of major announcements. The Metro puts it quite well, I think, sort of encapsulates what's happened today. It has both the deforestation announcement and also the methane emissions. Rachel, what have you made of today? It's the final day of the Leaders' Summit. Do you feel that these announcements are making the impact that clearly the leaders here want them to?
I think so. I've been inside COP for most of the day, and I feel like we're in a bit of a bubble actually in here. And I think these announcements have been seen as quite optimistic. We heard from the Prime Minister earlier. He went back to his football analogy. So he had been talking about at the weekend how we were 5-1 down in this, and now he thinks we're maybe into extra time now, and he seemed to have a little bit more optimism than he's had in the previous week because of these announcements that have been made here today and yesterday. And we saw the First Minister today. She spoke to a number of Scottish journalists, and she seemed to say and be speaking about the optimism that she was feeling in the conference, whereas before everyone felt a bit downhearted. It didn't seem, we were coming to COP26 with not, people were ambitious, but they didn't seem to have much hope of what was going to happen here. But, the first 2 days of the leaders being here, everyone is around. There's a very kind of optimistic and jovial atmosphere in the building. But whether these are going down as well outside the building, because when you look at the detail of these announcements, for example, when you look at the pledge to cut methane, for example, that doesn't include Russia and China, who are two of the biggest emitters of this. So I think, yes, they look good and they sound good sometimes when you see Boris Johnson talking about them or Joe Biden talking about them, but actually when you look at the detail of them and you talk to people outside, campaigners, are they going down as well as they are inside this building? And that's where we're going to have to really look to see now. Yeah,
when it comes to deforestation, I spoke to Al Gore earlier on tonight on Sky News, and he reminded us that in 2014 in New York, there was a similar commitment to really tackle deforestation, and actually nothing happened. In fact, the worst thing happened. It actually did get worse, and more deforestation happened. And that's the fear, isn't it? It's all very well having these great policy ideas, but we've got to follow through with action. Do you think there will be action this time on deforestation?
Well, they say there's going to be, but then they've said that before. And I think, as Rachel said, it's the absentees that people are going to be looking at, both China and Russia, but also because of deforestation, Brazil. Are they going to commit? Is Bolsonaro, is he going to be the leader who's going to say, right, I'm going to stop ripping apart the Amazon that really are the lungs of the world and allow the regrowth there? Or is he going to carry on? Because he doesn't seem to show much interest in any environmental agenda. So I think, will anything happen? You hope so. Boris Johnson is certainly buoyant, but then he's buoyant about anything that he decides he's going to be buoyant in that moment. That doesn't mean that anything's going to happen. I hope they do get somewhere. And, Joe Biden was saying today that he believed that more had happened at this conference than anything at any other conference of this nature before. We just have to wait and see. We hope. And it does feel as though outside in the wider media and in the wider world that there's much more focus now on environmental issues, environmental questions. It's no longer a fringe thing for people who wear sandals and grow their hair long. This is something that everybody feels and wants to be part of. But we have to wait and see.
Yeah, let's slide in the Times front page. They're focusing on the methane announcement. And one of the problems, Rachel, is that it's a voluntary commitment, isn't it? And how are we going to police it? And our US correspondent, Mark Stone, showed just how difficult that is, even somewhere like America, in Texas, where, you can show that perhaps people are allowing methane to go into the atmosphere in quantities that it shouldn't be. But actually enforcing it is really difficult.
Yeah, this is going to have to be something that the governments, and as I said before, we're here, these announcements are getting made, they look very shiny, they look very great when you're at a conference. We all want to be talking about climate change. As Paul said, this is something that everybody seems to be interested in now. You just have to look at the number of celebrities that are turning up here, for example. This is something.
Have you seen him, Leonardo DiCaprio?
I did not see Leonardo DiCaprio today. I did see Greta Thunberg, though,
Okay.
so that was kind of, you're seeing some of the big names that are here. But I think when you look at it now, it's a bigger issue, but it is, how will these governments go back and how will these play out in their countries? And how, for example, do you get with methane, the agriculture sector, fracking, for example, two of the big issues with this in America? These are two huge industries over there. And how do you sort that out? And I think it looks very good when you're here, as I said. I think it looks, you have COP and these announcements, and that's what people want. They want this, they want the hope, they want the optimism. But actually, at the end of these 2 weeks, what's going to happen? Are we going to look back in 6 months and say, that was a bit of a waste of time because it filled the papers. You could talk about it on television. It got us some positive press for a little bit. But, places like Russia and China aren't taking it seriously, potentially. They're not here. And what does that say globally for what people are going to do in their countries too? What kind of message does that send to people there who run companies, who run businesses, who are producing methane and other fossil fuels or gases? What are they? What kind of message are we sending to these people? So I think actually it's not about these 2 weeks. It's when we get past these 2 weeks, 6 months, a year down the line, what has happened, what's been achieved here.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the story that's on the front of the Telegraph. It's going to feature heavily tomorrow, the finance implications. And as our science editor earlier was talking about, the rewiring of the global financial system, because at the end of the day, that is a crucial part to all this, isn't it?
It's absolutely fundamental, and I think Mark Carney talked a little about this, how much money is tied up, the vast amounts of money that are tied up in particular funds with different banks and with different financial vehicles, and trying to encourage them to move into some area that looks at fossil fuel divestment. That is where we're really going to get some impact. And Rachel's right, when it's at governmental level and they go back to their nations and big beef producers in particular nations say, well, we're not really into this, we need to keep our industry going. If there are financial houses behind them saying, no, hold on, you're not going to get the investment to do that unless you follow our particular plan, that's when I think we will see the difference. There was a protest today in the middle of Glasgow by Extinction Rebellion. They cut off one of the main streets, Waterloo Street, for quite a number of hours. They were campaigning outside one of the American investment banks, JP Morgan, because of this very thing. They said they're not divesting quickly enough from fossil fuels. And I think that may be where the focus will move quickly from now. Follow the money. That's where we'll get the result.
Yeah, and it was interesting hearing Boris Johnson, wasn't it, in his final news conference, in fact, speaking to our political editor, talking about our personal responsibility as well. And we need to walk away from those companies, from those banks that don't do what we feel they should be doing when it comes to the climate. We have a role in that as well. And we'll just finish before the break with the front of the FTSE, their headline, banks under fire for diluting pledges. And again, it goes back to what you were saying before. It's all very well making that pledge, but you've got to follow through.
Yeah, and I think this is another area, like we were talking about with the Telegraph front page, where we've got to take people with us. The government has to take people with them on this. And how do they do that? How do they look at businesses, banks, and make sure that they are doing what they say they're going to do and doing what they need to be doing in this fight? This is something we've heard from everyone. This affects everybody on the planet. And as we said just now, everybody is interested in this. Everybody has a role to play in it. And there is that personal responsibility, there is that responsibility from business, but it's up to the government to ensure that they're taking everyone with them as well, and that people realise that responsibility and act on it as well.
Yeah, just before we head to the break, want to get your thoughts on President Biden criticising China, saying it was a big mistake for President Xi and President Putin not to be here. Is that a bit of an own goal, do you think? Has he made a mistake there, perhaps not being more diplomatic? Because they won't like that, will they, being criticised?
They won't like that, but China will always play the long game anyway, and I don't think it's really going to put their nose out of joint. I guess they know they should have been here, but do they care enough? I don't think that they'll be terribly upset by what Joe Biden says. And they're pushing ahead. There was a story this morning that because of an energy crisis in China at the moment, they're ramping up mining of coal so that they can produce more energy in that way. So they're just going ahead with what they want to do anyway. I don't think Biden had it was a diplomatic gaffe. He was saying if we're serious about this, everybody has to be serious.
Yeah, they've announced the opening of more than 14 coal-fired power stations this year alone, haven't they? A quick thought on this, Rachel, from you?
Yeah, I think the same as Paul. I think, there's countries that are not here that know that they should have been here. They say, we heard from Boris Johnson earlier that it was COVID is the reason that they're not here. But whether that is the case or not, this would have been a very difficult conference for countries like Russia and China to send their leaders to. And I think, that will have been in the back of their minds as well as COVID. Yeah. And it is something, that we've heard from the leaders on today.
Yeah, the Prime Minister being more diplomatic, I think, than the President, it's fair to say. Yeah. Thank you both very much indeed. Stay with us. Coming up after this short break, something to whine about. Yeah, wine might not be as good for you, I'm afraid, as scientists originally thought. Talking about that and plenty more in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Glasgow. You're watching the press preview. Paul and Rachel still with me. The front page of the Mirror. This is a very worrying headline. 60,000 carers face sack over jabs. Carers have been told that they could lose their jobs if they refuse to have the vaccine. And the care system's already in crisis. This is really going to push it over the edge.
Well, if it does happen, I mean, I'm surprised that 60,000 staff have refused jabs at all, considering how at risk an awful lot of people, particularly the elderly who were taken from hospitals and put into care homes really without any checks, that people who work with them are prepared to risk their health by not having the jab in the first place. So that the number is quite staggering, really, to begin with. And then I suppose we boil it down and see whether that is actually the case. But if it is, and it is 60,000 people who will be pushed out of that industry, that is a crisis for the industry. Yeah,
according to this, the article in the Mirror, 105,000 vacant posts already.
Yeah, this is one of the areas that we are seeing a crisis in staffing, and we're seeing it in a number of sectors across the UK and in Scotland. And this story actually brings, in Scotland, there's not been any threats of any nature from the Scottish Government on social care workers having to be double jabbed, but we have heard from care home workers and bosses who said they have rewritten contracts to ensure that everybody who now starts with them is fully vaccinated before they start. So we've already seen moves within the sector to ensure that their staff are vaccinated, their residents are the people they go out to are safe from COVID, and that they have that extra protection from those looking after them. And I think it is a conversation that a lot of people are having. Should people who are working with vulnerable people be fully vaccinated? But when we're facing such a crisis in our social care and healthcare system, it does feel like there needs to be a better way to solve this than to get rid of them. Yeah,
OK, you can read more inside the Mirror. And we'll just finish on this story. I've been clinging on, Paul, to that bit of research from many years ago that a glass of wine a night is good for you. Now they're saying it might not be.
Yeah, well, quite a few of us have been clinging on to that, and it's not just one glass, and that and it is getting late, and it's getting close to that time. I have read this story twice, and the headline certainly says that isn't good to you, and I haven't had any yet, but I can't quite make sense of the final two paragraphs to work out whether being totally abstemious is the best thing to do or to have a little bit more, because it seems to suggest that both ways you're pretty doomed, as we all are.
Well, that's quite an optimistic note to finish on. Rachel, very quick thought on this from you.
Yeah, it was the same as Paul. It was one of those stories that when you read it, your first instinct is, oh, that's oh no, basically, is the answer to that. But I think when you start to read through it, the details there and the differences between those who are teetotal and those who maybe have one a night, and actually it's probably the same, because it says people who are teetotal usually have a reason to quit drinking alcohol, and that's how they've made that comparison in the story.
Yeah.
And that research has
Yeah. Do you
come
like a
out that
glass
we're
of
all
wine
the
every
same.
night?
Maybe not every night.
Maybe
but
not every night. No,
not when I'm on the
excellent.
television.
Well, it's hard when you're working
midnight.
till midnight,
Yeah,
I can tell you.
that's true.
Thank you both very much.